Hello YouTube and welcome back to the garage. So in tonight's video I'm just going to really spend a bit of time talking about where we're going to go with the bike styling wise. I've actually spent quite a bit of time in the garage, but I haven't really got a lot to show for it, as you'll see. But I've come to some decisions on where we're going to go with the bike, and some of the items are going to fit, some of the things I'm going to change my mind on. So yeah, so the first job I've done, if I just lower you down a bit, is you can see that I've stripped down the rear shock, done a bit of painting on it, and yeah, we just need some new seals to arrive for this, and then I can start reassembling it. The other thing I've done is obviously fitted a Schrader valve in the end cap so we can repressurize it, and I've also got this length hydraulic hose, which means that I can now reposition the reservoir here sort of towards the back of the bike, roughly where the regulator rectifier normally sits on the frame, and that solves all the problems of where we're going to actually sit the reservoir. With this hose, now originally I wanted to go for braided hose, but the problem is the diameter of hose you need for the reservoir is about 4 to 5 mil. Now standard brake line is around about 3 mil diameter, so I was going to have to get some thicker braided line, and then obviously the associated banjo fittings and everything. The problem is just the banjo fittings on their own, we're going to come to about 75 quid plus the hose plus the olives, so it's going to be a bit of an expensive length of hose. So I decided to go down to my local hydraulic factors and get them to make up this hose. It was cheaper, but not a lot, unfortunately. So whilst it's far from ideal and it's got this red band with their brand name stamped all over it, the reality is when it's actually fitted to the bike, most of it is going to be hidden by the seat unit, so you're not really going to see it anyway. So I can live with that. So there's the shock. The other thing I've been doing is sorting out what we're going to do for the Speedo mount, or the Speedo sensor, which is this little jobby here. So this needs to be mounted somewhere on the bike so that it can actually pick up on magnets mounted on the wheel. I did want to put it towards the rear of the bike, maybe run it off the rear brakes disc. Unfortunately that proved to be a non-starter, because the actual magnets are mounted inside the bolts that hold the disc on, and obviously on the CB-1 they are actually Allen headed bolts, but they're sort of a recessed bolt as well, so you can't really put a magnet where you put your Allen key because you'll never get the bolts out again. And also the mounting bracket for the caliper just didn't really lend itself to being modified and still allow you to line this up with the brake discs. Couldn't put it on the other side because obviously you've got the chain, and the last thing I want is wires flapping around near the chain, and also it meant every time you adjusted the wheel you'd have to adjust the bracket that this fitted on. So I kind of resolved myself to the fact that I'm going to have to fit it to the front wheel somewhere. So let's swing you round and we'll have a look at the front wheel and I will show you what I've come up with. Okay, so here's the front disc, and it's the mounting bolts that are just here that we can replace with a normal headed bolt with a magnet in it, and there's going to be two, one basically 180 degrees apart. So I needed to find somewhere to mount it. Now in an ideal world I would have liked to have mounted it somewhere down here underneath towards the back, but if we look closely there was no way I was going to get that to line up with one of the disc bolts. There really is very little space under the fork to mount a bracket for this. I then thought about maybe putting it at the front, but I didn't really like it at the front. It's kind of in the way, looks a bit messy. So I had to settle for the fact that it's going to be mounted somewhere here at the back of the fork tubes. So I did a little bit of cutting and grinding, and I've made up this little bracket here. So it's basically a bit of tube and a triangular bracket. And the idea is that your speedo mount or speedo sensor goes through here. It's just clamped down with a little grub screw, and then the idea is it will actually, I will get some slightly longer bolts that will actually protrude through the fork leg, and then this will mount on those bolts. But just to give you a bit of an idea, I'll cheat and put a bolt in through the other way. The other thing I've discovered is the back of the fork legs on the Fireblade kind of dish out like this, so not a big problem. Just means I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time with a file just smoothing them off at the back so that this mounts properly. But if I just mount that in there, obviously just put that in temporarily just so you can get an idea of where it's going to sit, and then we can run maybe run a little P-clip just across here, hold the cable out of the way, and then I'll actually just attach the cable to the brake hose so that keeps that all nice and tidy. Yeah. Unfortunately, no matter what you do with this, it's always going to look a little bit messy. That might be a better solution, running something like that. But I'll worry about that nearer the time. So that is the digital speedo mount or speedo sensor sorted out. As you can see, it does tuck in quite nicely. Obviously, the cable is what it is. I suppose there is a possibility of running it up behind the caliper mount, but I don't know, don't really like that idea. It's all a bit worryingly close to the rotors, so you've got the potential for things rubbing there, which is never a good idea. So I'm just going to have to accept that, yeah, it's going to be a bit scrappy, but it'll work. So that's the first job I've been doing. The second job is I've been trying to decide what to do about a headlight. My original thoughts were to go with something like an MT-07 headlight unit, or possibly even some sort of fairing mounted headlight. The problem is everything I came up with just wasn't going to work quite right with these handlebars. The MT-07 unit probably would have worked, but the more I looked at it, the less I liked it. Anything with a fairing is always going to look silly with these sort of fat bars anyway, so I've decided to bin the idea of a fairing and just go back to a round headlight. So I had a rummage around in amongst my spares pile, and I found this chrome headlight. Rather like it. It's about the right sort of size. Sort of fits the style of the bike, and I think that's what I'm going to go with. I also ordered a cheapy Chinese headlamp bracket, but as you can see, if I just zoom you in there we go. You can see that it's the actual mounting triangle itself isn't big enough. So in the next episode we'll look at making a new triangle to mount the headlight. The other problem we had with this headlight is I can't actually use the stock ignition barrel anymore. If I drop the headlight, it really does look stupid, but with it in its current position, it actually fouls the headlight unit. And I did try the shallower headlight, the original CB-1 headlight, and it just didn't look as good as that one. So I'm going to have to come up with an alternative solution for what I'm going to use for an ignition key. I might even look at perhaps one of these wireless remote activated fobs or something of that nature, or I may just find somewhere discreet to mount the ignition key. So that's the front end sort pretty much done now. Like I said, I'm not 100% certain about the headlight, but I think once we've got a slightly bigger bracket that just sort of fills this gap better, that will improve things no end. So yeah, so as you can see, all of that has been a lot of faffing around, trying things, deciding I don't like them, going and looking for something else and trying that in its place. It takes up a hell of a lot of time, and at the end of it, it doesn't look like you've really done a lot. So that's the front end sorted. Now we're going to move on to the rear, where I've been looking at possible options for seats. So again, bear with me a second while I move the camera. I move the bike, and we'll have a look at rear seat units. Okay, here we are at the rear of the bike, and as you can see, I've removed the rear section of the under tray that mounts the tail light and the number plate, and we're going to have a look at seat units. I've also, one of the things I've decided quite early on was that I was going to stick with the standard swing arm and the standard rear wheel. Now, there are quite a few people who have been asking about fitting wider wheels and tyres to the rear of a CB-1. So once I've had a look at seat units, I will actually get the camera and we'll come in and we'll have a closer look at the rear wheel and the chain alignment and everything. And we'll have a quick discussion on what is and isn't possible on the CB-1 as far as increasing the size of your wheels and tyres. But let's get back to the job in hand and what we're going to do for a seat unit. Now, I'm going to show you a picture in a minute of one of my all-time favourite modified CB-1s. Absolutely love this bike, and he used, I believe it was an RS-250 seat unit. He also did quite a bit of modifying to the rear subframe to get it to fit, but I think it works really, really well, and I was very, very tempted to do exactly the same. The thing is, A, it's already been done. In fact, I think there's at least 2 bikes where it's been done to. And B, I'm not sure if the RS-250 seat unit was really going to work with these handlebars. Looked great with clip-ons. Don't think it would really suit the handlebars. So let me go and grab a couple of seat units. I've sort of had a rummage around in my spares pile, see what I've got. So the first seat unit I thought I'd try was an NC23 unit. Now, before we fit it, there is just one thing I want to talk about with changing seat units on the CB-1, and the reason the RS-250 seat unit worked really well. So if I just zoom you in on the tank, you can see on the bottom of the tank here, there is this cutout. And the reason for this cutout is that the standard seat actually has a cutout here, and it wraps around, if I can fit it properly, wraps around the back of the tank, and the front of the seat actually fits in these recesses. Let's just zoom you out. Now, I've seen quite a few people who have put brat style seats on and traditional cafe racer seats, but they leave this bit as it is, and it's a very much personal view, but I just personally think it looks all wrong and it makes the bike look a bit unfinished. So really you need a seat unit that will cover this area, or alternatively you need to do some really skillful bodywork and somehow plate over this area and blend it all in. And to be honest, that's way beyond my bodywork skills, and the thought of welding onto a petrol tank doesn't really appeal to me. So I'm going to go the other route, and I'm going to try, I've got some seat units that will hopefully wrap around the back of the tank and solve that problem. So like I said, the first seat unit I thought I would try is an NC23 seat unit, because funnily enough I've got quite a few of those kicking around, and here is a single seat NC23 unit. Now you can see as it stands at the moment, let's just jiggle that round a bit. It could work quite well. we've got this front section that can be trimmed in to hide most of that recess. Obviously, as it stands at the moment, the seat is fouling on obviously the standard seat catch, which we wouldn't need anyway, so it would actually sit a little bit lower, and I think that kind of works apart from two little issues. The first one is the amount of space here to sit in. There isn't a lot of space. It's very, very tight. It works fine on the NC23 because actually it does sit somewhere back here. Gives you a bit more room. But the other thing I don't like about it, it's a bit too square and boxy at the back. Doesn't really match the roundness of the tank. Although the NC23 tank is a very similar sort of shape with the fairings and that, you don't really notice the boxiness of the rear end very much. So it would work, but personally, like I said, it just seems a bit square at the back here. And okay, I know it stands out more because of the blue, but I don't know. I think I'm gonna discount that option. Also, your seat would be up here somewhere. I mean, it's not impossible to do, and it would sort of work. But again, I don't think it really works with the handlebars either. So I'm discounting the NC23, although it would be a very, very easy seat unit to swap on. Staying with 400 sports bikes, here is an NC30 unit. Again, you've got the front part that kind of obscures the cutouts in the tank, but it just doesn't seem to work. It's way too high up here. I mean, even if we manage to get it as low as possible, it just seems a bit too high. It definitely doesn't work. And again, very square and boxy. The rear end's a bit fat. Don't really like that. So yeah, sorry NC30, we're definitely not going to go with you. The next seat unit I came up with is this. It's a single seat for a CBR 600. Now you can see with quite a bit of trimming, it would actually sort of fit. It's a bit wide here, but we could sort of build that up with fiberglass. But there are some big gaps in here that would need addressing. Could I lower it a bit? Possibly at the back, but it doesn't really work because A, you've got this nice pointy back end, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem to work with the handlebars. It's very sort of old school Street Fighter, I'll give it that, but you've got a lot of the rear subframe shut, so you would definitely need to cut all that off and change it all. By the time you've changed it all, it would sort of sit more at that sort of angle, but down a bit. But the only way you're going to see if it would work or not is to cut the subframe off, try it, and see how it goes. But I don't know, it's just all a bit too wide here. Suit a slightly bigger bike, the 600, doesn't really suit the 400. The other problem I have with it is you've only got this foam pad, and yeah, maybe sort of 10-15 years ago I'd have been quite happy with that, but these days I kind of like the comfort a bit. So yeah, Going to discount that, but again, it's a possibility. So far, out of the 3 seat units, 23 would work. This could be made to work, but it will need quite a lot of reprofiling at the front. So I'm going to discount that. Which is rather annoying, because I actually bought this seat unit specifically for this project, hoping it would work. But it doesn't. So the other thing I keep thinking of is, well, with these handlebars, there is a certain sort of flat tracker kind of styling about it. And I have got a flat tracker seat unit. Now, this one definitely doesn't work. It's far too short. It's actually, yeah, probably a bit narrow. But again, we've got this problem. It doesn't cover up the front of the tank. So whilst that would have been a good option, it's a bit dated really, the whole flat tracker thing. And yeah, it just doesn't deal with the issues here. So there is one final option I'm going to go for, and this is where we're going to go with the project one. Now I know what you guys are all thinking. What a cop out. It's the standard NC27 rear unit. And you're right, it is the standard NC27 rear unit. And the standard NC27 rear seat. But the one thing I really like about it at the moment is I've removed the tail light unit and the number plate mount. And once you put this in place, it all looks a bit solid and a bit boring. But as soon as you take that away, I actually really like the look of the standard seat unit. And I think if I were to make a small sort of tail tidy number plate mount, just a thin little aluminium tail tidy, it will look quite good. I think the other thing that's going to improve the rear end is the rear pillion mounts. So this is your standard pillion peg. They are quite chunky. They're very much of their time. So I've looked around for something different to act as an exhaust bracket and pillion mount. And you'll never guess where I robbed these from. Yes, our favourite donor bike, an early Fireblade. Now as pillion pegs, they're going to be absolutely useless because they're way too close to the seat for anyone over about 4'6". But they do look a lot neater and tidier than the original CB-1 pillion mounts. So we have that. Unfortunately, we do have a regulation in the UK that if your bike has the pillion seat, you have to have pillion pegs for it. Now, of course, I could leave pillion pegs on for the MOT and then maybe come out with a slightly different bracket that bolts on for everyday use. The other option is if I were to put a cowl over the pillion seat, then you can claim that there is no pillion seat and therefore we don't need them. So yeah, Fireblade pillion pegs, as you can see, not only do they sit quite a bit higher than the CB-1 pegs, especially with the exhaust mount, but the exhaust mount is at the rear rather than the front, which again makes life a bit easier. Because here is the exhaust I'm hoping to use. It's just a cheapy carbon fibre jobby, and that's going to sit something like that. All well and good? Well, no, not really. I've actually tried sitting on the bike with this configuration, and with the handlebars it's a very upright riding position. So I actually want to bring my pillion pegs, my rider pegs back a bit, and make my own rear sets. So I'm probably going to have to mount the can somewhere back here a bit, just to clear the new foot pegs. As you can see, with the exhaust in that position, the back of your foot is going to hit the actual exhaust can itself, so it is going to have to move back a bit. But equally, you don't want it to come too far back, because you don't want it to project beyond the line of the rear of the bike. It's never a good idea to have an exhaust that sticks beyond the rear of the tyre, because if someone does rear end you, they're going to hit the exhaust first rather than the rubber tyre. So yeah, so we're going to have to come up with a novel way of mounting that. And obviously this clamp isn't the correct clamp for this exhaust. So yes, so sorry it was a very short one, this. Oh yes, and one last thing. Obviously I mentioned that I'm going to get rid of the rear mount, but what I am going to do is I am going to cut it down here, cut off the number plate mount. As you can see, someone's already cut the reflector mount off it, and it's a bit damaged around. You can see it's obviously been bashed at some point or pushed in, because there's a big crease just here in it, and the same on the other side. So don't worry, I'm not cutting up a good one. This is definitely one that, yeah, isn't good enough to use for restoration, but certainly good enough to cut. And I think once I've cut that down so it's not visible underneath the subframe or underneath the seat cowl, I think it's all going to look quite good. So there we go. Look forward to hearing your comments. I'm sure there'll be plenty of you on Facebook saying that I've kind of copped out a bit and taken the easy option, and to be honest, yes I have, but I actually really like this option. I think it does actually look better than all the other seat units. So there we go, very quick one, but thanks again for watching, and in next week's video I will do a bit more. So we will be fabricating a set of rear sets, and I'll be fabricating the new mounting bracket for the headlight. So yes, if you can wait till next week, there will be lots of cutting and filing and grinding and making up new bits for the bike. So until then, thanks ever so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and I'll be back next week.